Good morning to everybody, and welcome to this new show. As you know, I've interviewed many scientists, lawyers, doctors around the globe in order to create a picture that is different from the political narrative that we're getting. Today, I have the pleasure of having on this show a famous US lawyer, Aaron Siri. He's the managing partner of Siri Glimstead, a leading law firm in the US who have been working really on civil rights and vaccine litigations. He has 20 years of experience on the legal front, working on transparency, representing a lot of clients against the mandates of vaccines, not only COVID vaccines, but in general. And I'd like to actually welcome Aaron Siri on this show. Good morning, Aaron Siri, and welcome to France-Soir. As I'm sure you're aware, in the US, there's a lot of things happening, and our European audience does not really have a real clue. And I thought it would make sense to have it from the horse's mouth. So maybe we can start with the Maha decree that came into play in early January, just after Trump took office. And what, in your views, have happened, I would say, before that and since then?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, obviously, having Secretary Kennedy at the helm of the Department of Health and Human Services, and for those in Europe who may not know, the Department of Health and Human Services that Secretary Kennedy is the head of, is the department in our federal government here in the United States in which all our federal health agencies are located. So the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the National Institute of Health, the NIH, and so forth. There's lots of them. And so all of them are under the umbrella of the Department of Health and Human Services, which Secretary Kennedy is now the head of here in the United States. Now, of course, as the head of this department, that doesn't mean he gets to do whatever he wants. There's still the White House above him, and then he still has 65,000 career employees below him, as well as about 200 political appointees. And, there's lots of different opinions and views and so forth. With that said, since he's come into office, he's obviously been able to affect a number of changes. For example, the other day, you might have heard the announcement that he canceled over 20 contracts that one of the agencies called BARDA in HHS was funding with regards to mRNA research. I think specifically with regards to vaccines in large part. That's an example of the type of change that I have no doubt would not have happened. It was about $500 million of research would not have happened had Secretary Kennedy not been in office. Another example is there's changes coming to what something called the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program here in the United States. In the United States, you can't sue a vaccine maker, a pharma company, for injuries from most vaccines in the U.S. to claim that the vaccine could have been made safer. It is the only product in the United States that I'm aware of where you can't bring that claim against a pharmaceutical company. You could sue for drugs, planes, car, you name it. But since 1986, pharma companies have had free reign to essentially not to make as much money as they want without any check, the real check on how products are made safer, which is companies.
This is what you're calling the PrEP Act, yeah? That's the PrEP Act.
No, that's called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. And that applies to, I'm talking about all vaccines, pretty much.
Okay.
Not just COVID vaccines. So for those vaccines, if you're injured in the United States, you can bring a claim, but you don't sue the pharmaceutical company. You sue, ironically, Secretary Kennedy, the head of HHS. So the very department responsible for vaccine safety is also responsible in the U.S. for defending against any claim that a vaccine causes injury. It creates an incredible conflict. Of course, they're not going to publish studies that show vaccines cause harm, because then it'll be used against them to create liability. It also undermines their efforts to always promote vaccines and so forth. So with that said, the main way that you assure product safety is market forces. The self-conforming conduct of companies because they want to make money. They don't want to lose money. So their drugs, for example, they often will have longer term trials. They test their planes really well. They'll test other products because they don't want to end up with lots of liabilities. So that's another example. Secretary Kennedy is forming that program that exists to provide some minimal compensation to those injured by vaccines. And so those are two examples. There are others of changes that have occurred since Secretary Kennedy came into office that I have no doubt would not have happened if he wasn't there.
Aaron Siri, of course, there's been a lot of movements. If you look at the audience from the US and the expectations in Europe, some people are starting to question the pace at which things are going. Sometimes they would like things to move much faster than they are actually doing. In your views, as a lawyer, because you've been in this world for a long time, and you know the citizens have expectations to have things move overnight, do you think that a lot has happened or little has happened?
You mean within HHS, or do you mean in the landscape generally here in the US?
Yeah, I would say within HHS, within the MAHA.
It is, as I noted, there's a lot of, Secretary Kennedy obviously needs to get approvals from the White House often for things that are, let's say, going to make the news or of significance. And so, he's got that group of folks that he's got to contend with, and they're not necessarily all MAHA aligned. There's varying views, I assume, amongst the folks over there who are part of the Domestic Policy Council, and there's a whole group of folks over there at the White House who will weigh in one way or another for various reasons, because some issues will implicate finances, some will implicate relationships with different interests and so forth. Then separately, he's got 65,000 career employees who are across HHS. I would just, speculate, I would say, and I think it's probably a good speculation, that most of them are not in alignment with his view, in particular because these folks, over the last 40 years in the United States, have overseen the largest decline in childhood health in recorded human history. We have gone from 13%, under 13% of children in America in the early 80s that had a chronic disease, to now over 50% of children in America have a chronic disease, and often multiple. So he's sitting at the head of an agency that has overseen this incredible decline in childhood and adult health over the last 40 years. And what you're basically asking them to do is say, hey, look, you need to evaluate what you did wrong, admit you did it wrong, and self-correct. And that's the thing about asking people to commit suicide. They don't readily do it. And that's really what he's got. He's got 65,000 people in many respects that are like that. And at the heart of that, or I could say one of the main things that they just cannot admit or look at or I consider is the fact that when you look at these chronic diseases that have exploded, most of them are some form of immune system dysregulation. Asthma, go down the list. They're almost all, some form of immune system dysregulation. And in America, the CDC schedule, if you followed it in 1986, a child got 3 injections by the first year of life. Today, if you follow the childhood schedule in America, by the first year of life, including what you would get on the first birthday, you would get 29 injections, including in utero, 3 to 29. And at the same time, you had this explosion of chronic disease that are all underlying immune system dysregulation. If the vaccines, and there are a lot of studies, all the studies have been done that compare kids with no vaccines to get vaccines, like for the most part have found multiple times the rate of the very chronic diseases that we have seen explode. But for our federal health agencies in America to admit that their vaccine program, that they hail as this incredible achievement, that they in many ways look at almost with a religious fervor. We saved everybody, almost like, the way that people talk about religion. I believe in vaccines. They saved us all. It's all religious talk, right? That to admit that maybe it contributed in part, or maybe in large part, is a real problem. And and what Secretary Kennedy is trying to do is he's not saying it causes it even. He's saying, let's study it properly. And he's getting, on that alone, just to study it, that alone is no doubt creating incredible resistance amongst the career employees, because it would be to admit that they are the ones who may have overseen and even caused this incredible decline. So yes, I know that folks want to see a lot of change faster. I get it. I do too. Everybody does. But change rarely happens quickly, often happens in increments, and it's happening incrementally, and hopefully it'll accelerate over time.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's a very important point, Aaron Siri, to actually talk about this, because expectation management, as I mentioned, is something that is slightly different when you're just really expecting than when you have to actually manage change. And what you seem to be saying is Secretary Kennedy has to actually tread on thin ice, because he is being attacked from and he has to manage all of these expectations himself. And he's going as fast as he can from at least our perspective. Now, you mentioned one element which is really important, and I think your firm has been at the forefront, which are facts, obtaining facts through FOIA, because there's a strong resistance from the government agencies to obtain data. Whether it's in the US or whether it's in Europe, we seem to actually be facing the same thing. We're paying for politicians and the administration to actually provide us with the transparency. They talk about transparency, but when it comes down to delivering the goods, they feel they fall short our expectations. And therefore, a firm like yourself, an individual like yourself, has to go through the loops and hoops and the extreme situation of obtaining this FOIA, this Freedom of Information Act, and even taking the administration to court. Now, has it been made easier in the last six months since Secretary Kennedy? Are you seeing some slight improvements? Because from our perspective, the data, what Kennedy is asking, Secretary Kennedy is asking, what you're asking is about the data, it's about the facts. And facts should be, I would say, should have no political color.
Yeah, they shouldn't. And it's always those in power who bristle at the thought of having their views or their facts or their work checked. All of these folks who are in government often, unfortunately, forget that they work for us, whether they are folks who are part of the French government, the German government, or the American government. The public servants who get a salary, they work for the public they represent. It's the whole idea of a liberal democracy, is the idea that the government works for the people. It's the people that really are the ones that should have the power, and they in some ways lend that to the government for a period of time. Unfortunately, over time, those agencies that are supposed to protect the interests of their citizens, who has the money, who has the time, the long game, the lobbying, the to influence all those government agencies? Is it you? Is it me? Is it any individual per se? As individuals? No, we're all busy in our lives. But the corporations are supposed to be regulating. Oh, they're very interested. And they spend an incredible amount of money lobbying, hiring the people from those agencies and so forth. With all of that said, it makes it all the more critical to be able to review the work that they're doing. And hence, in America, the tool is something called the Freedom of Information Act. It's a law passed by Congress that allows members of the public, including groups that I represent, in particular one group, the Informed Consent Action Network, ICANN, which funds almost all of our FOIA work to get transparency from federal health agencies. This law is a law that allows us to actually check on our employees. What are they doing? What are they writing an email? How do they make this decision? What underlies it? And so, for example, as you, I'm sure know, and your audience might know this too, when the FDA received the application from Pfizer to license its COVID-19 vaccine in the United States, it reviewed those documents in something like 40-something days, I believe, or 60 days, something to that effect. Forget the exact number at the moment. But yet when we, on behalf of our client, asked the FDA under this law, the Freedom of Information Act, to produce the documents reviewed in a short few months. It initially wanted to only give it to us at 500 pages a month, which would have taken 55 years. Then it turned out it was more pages. So that would have taken 75 years. Then when later on we learned that's even more pages, what they really wanted was over 100 years, meaning they wanted to wait till everybody on this planet had expired before they would give the public the copies of the documents and data. They said it took them only 40, 60 days to review to license this product. That is how democracy dies. It dies in the shadows and behind the closed doors of these agencies. If they're so confident in the job that they did, they should readily make that data available. Clearly they're not. Clearly they were concerned, and they continued to fight us even after the judge kept ruling in our favor and ruling in our favor over and over again. And because they knew until we have all the data, you can't really do a proper analysis of it. So that's a long way to answer your question. Yes, transparency is incredibly important. And we have, as of you and I talk right now, I think we have over 90 lawsuits against federal health agencies, I believe around that number right now, seeking responses to FOIA requests against federal health agencies in America.
And Aaron Siri, is it getting easier or not? Or is it still as tough as it was before? Because we've seen you in Congress, we've seen you on television, where you were just explaining or exposing the difficulty you had. But lately I've not been able to get a sense for that.
Yes. So when the current administration took over, familiar with Doge. Doge was a kind of a group sort of headed up by Elon Musk, and they came in to trim down government. And I think as part of those Doge cuts, my understanding is that there, lots of folks were let go. During that same period, many of the FOIA officers, the employees in these federal health agencies that would have been responsible for processing and putting out FOIA responses were let go. In fact, entire departments. And so with those terminations, that did have an effect of slowing down the productions. But I believe my understanding is, and I know Secretary Kennedy, I know that, having known him for a long time, he is committed to transparency. I know he's committed to it in his heart, and he's committed to it in deed. And I think that is an issue that the agencies and Secretary Kennedy are working on right now.
That's okay. That's very clear, and I think it's fair to actually explain the impact on the government policies with Doge and the Department of Government Efficiency. Now let's turn to this mRNA decision that Secretary Kennedy took a couple of days ago. I believe that you went on the record to talk about it. It's looking at the cancellation of a number of mRNA developments. However, there's still one outstanding question. There's been a call by a number of associations, a number of nonprofits to cancel these mRNA shots for COVID. And there's just a number of scientists that have gone on television, on the record, say there's enough evidence. And Secretary Kennedy has made some change to the ACIP. Now, as a lawyer, I'm going to ask you a difficult question because you don't like to make predictions, but how far do you believe we are from getting, I would say, a removal across the board or a more or higher restraint of the use of these mRNA shots?
Well, look, it's not a difficult question for me, and I'll tell you why. For me, I don't think any government should be in the business of vaccines. The business of vaccines should be done by the companies. And the normal forces of the market and of government should apply to them like any other product. You want to make a car, be responsible for that car. Make sure you can be liable if that car breaks. And the regulators, they shouldn't be promoting your car. They shouldn't be selling your car. They shouldn't be using government money to go out and try to get everybody to take your car, and they shouldn't mandate your car. So, and they shouldn't be licensing your car either. So, for me, in many respects, the government just needs to get out of the business entirely of vaccines, including mRNA vaccines. But to answer your question more specifically, I do not, whether or not, I think what you're asking me is, will the FDA revoke the license for the existing mRNA vaccine products? If you have watched what Vinay Prasad, who was the head of CBER, which includes the vaccine division of the FDA in the United States, has done over the last few months, he has actually licensed or expanded the licensure for 3 mRNA products. So clearly the FDA, under Vinay at least, was not going in the direction of withdrawing licensures. It was going the other direction. He has now been, he now stepped down, as widely reported, pushed out from that position. And I sure hope that the next person who takes over that position is not going to continue licensing vaccines without appropriate data and without taking account of all of the existing data and the widespread complaints and harms that we know these products can cause. I mean, it's obviously a very, very unfortunate situation. Now, at the end of the day, I mean, this is just my personal view on this. Whether a product's licensed, let's put it this way. There are all kinds of drugs that are licensed that hurt people. All kinds of drugs that hurt people, okay? They have all kinds of serious adverse events. And for some people, the benefits may outweigh the risk, and they can make that choice. But nobody makes an issue of that. Nobody gets upset. Nobody gets in arms about that often in the same way as they do with vaccines, because nobody's mandating you to take those products. It's the illiberal, rights-crushing mandates that cause, I believe, most of the outrage. It's one thing for you to say, hey, I got this product, and for me to maybe decide whether I want to take it. It's another thing for you to say, you must take it. And when you look at these products, I mean, think about like statins, heart disease. In America, the #1 killer of Americans is cardiovascular disease. Over 900,000 deaths, 900,000 deaths a year, okay? Nobody is running out and going, to save the hospital system, we must mandate statins. We must mandate exercise. We must mandate all of these things that are going to improve it. That is killing way more people than any infectious disease. In fact, all of them combined. I mean, by multiples. For example, if you look at almost any year in the last 40, 50 years. With that said, people would intuitively understand that that's crushing. But yet we have these products, all kinds of drugs that can cause a lot of harm. Now, mRNA vaccines can cause all kinds of harms. Does that mean we should remove it from the market? That's a decision that can be made. But I think the more important step, so that we don't have this problem again, is to stop relying on government to tell us how to live our lives. It is stop having this idea that if they can't persuade you on the merits, they get to bully you, coerce you, take away your rights. You can't go to school. You can't get a job. You can't get on a plane. That's the real problem, in my view, because the government's going to do something wrong again. I guarantee you it's going to happen. But when it does, when it licenses that next product, that's harmful. That's a problem. The first step in ensuring that you can avoid real widespread harm is get the government out of the business spending billions of dollars as they did in America promoting it. Spend billions of dollars more in trying to push it on the public, including through mandates, coercion, bullying. I mean, that's really what liberal democracies like the United States, like France, like countries and various other countries. When you look back, like at the French Revolution, you look back at the U.S. the revolution here. What was it? What was it trying to change? What was it a fight against? I would argue, I would submit to you that what these revolutions were, they were a renunciation, a saying no to all the forms of government that preceded it, in which somebody else got to tell you how to live your life, whether it was a dictator, a king, a central bureau, you name it, go down the list, whatever it was, that they knew better than you. That's what it was, a rejection of. And instead it was replaced with the idea of individual rights. We each as individuals can make our own decisions. Obviously, there are limits, but the greater harm is always to take away those rights. Free speech comes with dangers. If I let you say whatever you want, that's got dangers. I let you assemble with whoever you want, that can have dangers. Practice religion you want, all freedoms come with dangers. But the greater danger, as human history has shown, is ceding those rights to the government. And we saw the most incredible, most scary, in my view, of our time, ceding of rights in developed countries, in the, so to speak, Western world during COVID, right? We saw some of the most, and had that trend continued, I bristle to think where we'd be today. And luckily, it didn't. It was reversed. It was beaten back. And so, I know that's not exactly the answer you want. So, but
no, it's your answer, and I think it's actually a fair point to say that we have to push back on government taking away human rights and ruling our lives. And I think that's definitely part of the problem that we've actually seen over in Europe. And maybe I can ask you one final question, because of course we seem to be following two different paths. You're a lawyer in the US. If you're looking at what's happening in Europe, we basically are facing the same challenges: access to data, government that are taking our rights, that are promoting transparency, but in fact giving us obscurity and opacity in the contracts for the vaccines or the data. We're facing the same thing. So what would be your best advice to the Europeans in order to fight again for their own rights?
Well, obviously, it starts at the ballot boxes, and politicians who reflect to you a lack of respect for your individual right to make your choice, I would vote against them. I mean, that would be my first advice to you. And politicians that respect diversity of opinion, freedom of speech, when a politician reacts emotionally rather than with reason to your concerns, you got a problem, right? When you talk to somebody about vaccines and they only react with emotion, they don't react with knowledge, they don't talk to you about the clinical trial, they don't talk to you about data, they say, we have to censor you, we have to lock you up. Those are dangerous people. Because
they're saying, trust me, if you don't trust me, I will censor you.
Well, look, that's what every single dictator, bully, thug, criminal throughout history has always done. When they can't persuade you on the merits, what do? They say, all right, you won't agree? I'm not going to respect that. I'm going to censor you. I'm going to put you in jail. I'm going to take away your rights. I'm going to make your kids stay at home. That is what dictators, bullies, and thugs do. And those people have no place in public service. So when politicians in Europe say, well, if we don't like what you're saying, we're going to put you in jail, that's dangerous. Respond. In America, what the courts have often said is that the solution to speech you don't like is more speech, not censored speech. You don't like it? Rebut it. Persuade everybody that they're wrong. Persuade them. Don't censor them. That's really the solution. And politicians in Europe who don't appreciate and respect that, time to vote them out.
And I fully appreciate this. Aaron, in the US, you have the PrEP Act that are protecting sort of the vaccine manufacturers. In Europe, we didn't have. But in fact, you have had US firms that have tried to circumvent our legal system, our individual legal systems, and to impose upon us a PrEP Act-like contract. Now, in essence, now it's really hard to obtain transparency. It's really hard to go after Pfizer or Moderna or whatever manufacturer. I'm mentioning them, but it's any of them. In essence, you've mentioned in the early part of the interviews that you have to, if you want to go after the responsibility of the manufacturers, you have to go after Secretary Kennedy. And in France, for example, in order to go after Pfizer, our own Ministry of Health is going to pay the legal bills of Pfizer because it's part of the contract. So they have pretty much all sorts of advantage, no risk, all the benefits to the shareholders, and the risks are taken by the citizens, because we're taking the risk with the shots, and we're then being coerced if we don't comply. Now, if you had to give us some advice upon that, because this PrEP Act seems to be really a lockup situation in the US that applies the same principle to US citizens.
I mean, what we've seen is the contracts around the world is that the government's all indemnified Pfizer and similar companies from any harm. Let me make it very simple. What that means is that they basically effectively allow Pfizer to go and develop a product that could kill and maim the citizens of those countries with virtual impunity. Think
So
about
it's
that.
licensed to kill, not licensed to treat.
It is, but it's just good business. Okay. Pfizer is there to make money. That's their job for their shareholders. Okay. If they can sell a product, liability free. Why shouldn't they do that? It's good business. If you're the head of Pfizer, I totally get why you would do that. Okay. The problem is the governments that allowed it. And this is why I go back to what I said earlier. The governments need to get out of the business of these products. The moment the government puts itself in the shoes of the manufacturer, the moment that it promoted that product to the public, what was it going to do? Was it going to then admit that it hurt people? Of course not. The governments never admit they're wrong. The moment it put itself in those shoes, it conflicted itself from ever being objective again. The regulators, the government, all of it. And so those contracts are terribly illiberal. They create an incredible moral hazard where one, the company is going to make billions and they could do so with impunity versus risk. They're not worried about it. And the government is promoting it. So they're conflicted. So who's left? Who's left to stand there up for the individuals injured by these products? What moneyed interest is left? Nobody really. The lawyers can't sue, the product liability and so forth, because they're, for the most part, if they do, they got to fight the government. And that's never a fair fight often. We sue the government all the time, we know. On the other hand, the company can't be held liable. The government's not going to publicly admit it. The media doesn't want to typically go against government officials. So you end up with this, basically what you saw during COVID. Let's put it this way too, okay? At this point, let's think about this for a second, just objectively. 2025, or in August of 2025, first Pfizer vaccine in America rolled out in December of 2020, okay? So we've 5 years almost. They've been telling us it's safe for about 5 years. So if it's safe, why do they need immunity now? If it's so safe, it's been 5 years. Why do they need the immunity, right? Why? Why can't they just lift it? What do they have to worry about? Nobody got injured, right? Product's perfectly safe. The problem is as I just described. So really the solution is, I would say, vote out anybody who doesn't understand this problem. Because what you need is a government in France and America and everywhere to go in and undo all of this. Undo the contracts, which they can do by law. Undo all of this thing. Get out of the business of these vaccines and let the companies promote them. You want to tell me that a pharma company can make money off selling a drug to just a small group of people that causes a lot of injury and make money, but they can't sell a product that goes to millions every year? That's what and even let the government promote it potentially, I guess, but they shouldn't do it. Millions, they can't make money? Well, if they can't, that's a real problem. They're there to make money. Let me tell you something. If you got rid of the immunity and you let the normal market forces, you'd still have vaccines, but you'd have safe and effective vaccines, not the type of vaccines you get today because these companies have no risk.
Well, Aaron Siri, thank you very much for the time you've given us. I mean, it's the usual practice in France-Soir that we give the final word to the person that we have on the show. Is there anything we've missed out in the discussion? I'm sure there's a lot of very important things which we could talk about for hours, but is there one thing that you'd like European audience, the French audience, to know about what's happening in the US? A word of hope, a word of difficulties, how can we work together, or?
Well, you've given me most of the time to talk, but I will say this. I mean, at least in the United States, and obviously I'm not as familiar with the landscape in Europe, but at least in the United States, there is a growing recognition of the importance of the what I would consider a fundamental right to be able to say no to a mandated medical product if you don't want it. Because think about it. If the government can say to you, hey, if you don't get this product, you can't go to school, you can't get a job, you can't go into public buildings, you can't participate in civil society, then what good are any of your rights? You're a prisoner in your own home. You can't go anywhere. You can't even go to your house of worship. You can't go to your job. You can't go to, you are basically a prisoner at that point. And so it is in many ways a fundamental right. And I think that in the US, at least certain big parts of it, I think there's a growing recognition here that this is a fundamental human right, the ability to say no. Listen, public health authorities, public health agencies, if they want to try to persuade the public, okay. But if they can't, that's where it should end. After billions and billions of dollars trying to promote the COVID vaccines to American public, almost all of them aren't taking them anymore. But yet they still think the problem is with their messaging. The problem is with you. No, the problem is with your product. The problem is not with us, the public. We collectively have made our choice, and the government needs to back off. And so my message then to the European community is that my hope is that they too will express to their political leaders and those in power that this is a fundamental and important human right. And for anybody out there in Europe and in France watching this show right now who loves every vaccine, and you love every mask, man, and you love stay-at-home orders, great. Okay. I will fight for your right. I'm not in Europe, but I would fight for your right to get as many vaccines as you want, wear as many masks as you want, stay at home in your basement forever if you want, because that's freedom. Okay. But nobody should be required to do it, because let me tell you something. You may love all vaccines today. You may love every mandated medical product, but if the day comes that they mandate one that you don't want to get, and you didn't stand up for this right today, it may be too late for you to say no then, because rights ceded are rarely returned.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Aaron Siri, for the time you've given us. Thank you very much for everybody for listening. I remind everyone that this program is actually prepared with the community of the readers of France-Soir, who are made aware that we're going to interview someone. So I'm answering their questions. They are reluctant to mandates. They want to actually have free speech. And that's why what you say is what you get. I mean, this gets no cut, no edited. Thank you very much, Aaron Siri, for coming on the show. And thank you very much for everyone at France-Soir to listen to us. Have a really nice day in Pacific time, because I understand it's like almost 10 o'clock your time. Thank you very much, Aaron Siri, for giving us some of your time.
Thank you, and thank you for covering this important topic.